Ammo in Escape from Tarkov. Need I say more? It is arguably one of the most confusing aspects of the entire game. I'm Koozie, and in this video, I'm going to be explaining how ammo works in Escape from Tarkov, as well as giving you the best ammo to use in each and every caliber in the game. There's timestamps in the description. Let's get started. So with ammo in Escape from Tarkov, you have to pay attention to two key aspects: damage and pin value. Damage is how much health damage a bullet does, and pin value, which is a value used to determine how well a bullet penetrates armor. Now, you have some bullets that won't really penetrate well, but do really high amounts of flesh damage. And then you have some bullets that will penetrate really well, but don't really do that much flesh damage. Both of these types of bullets are effective in their own right. You just have to know how to use them properly. So for example, if you're using a round that has really low penetration value but high flesh damage, it's more ideal to aim for the target's legs, whereas if you're using a round that has really high penetration value, you want to aim for the head or the chest of that target. So before we get started, there's a lot more ammo in Escape from Tarkov than what you see here. What I've done is I've gone through each caliber in the game and I've selected the round that does the highest flesh damage, as well as the round that does the highest penetration value. And then for some of them, I've found a round that is kind of a good middle way, be it they're cheaper or they offer a better balance of penetration and flesh damage. Okay, so starting out with the 12 gauge Buckshot. If you're wanting something that has really high flesh damage, go with the 8.5 Magnum Buckshot. This does 50 flesh damage per shell. If you want something that does a higher penetration value but not as much flesh damage, the 12 gauge Flechette is the best move. And if you want something slightly better in flesh damage than the Flechette but a little bit better penetration than the Magnum Buckshot, go with the 7mm Buckshot. Now for 12 gauge Slugs, if you're wanting to go with high flesh damage, your 1270 rip rounds is going to be the move. This does 265 flesh damage. But if you ask me, the AP20 is arguably the best well-rounded slug for 12 gauge. It does 164 flesh damage and it has a pretty good penetration value. Now for your 20 gauge, which would be like for your Taz, I don't really want to touch on the Buckshot just because both of these are just atrocious. But for the 20 gauge Buckshot, obviously the highest flesh damage, which is a whopping 26, is your 5.6 Buckshot. And higher than that, as far as Buckshot goes, is going to be the 7.5mm Buckshot. That does 25. Now penetration doesn't really vary between these two, so I would honestly go with the 5.6. Now as far as slugs go in the 20 gauge, you want to go with the Devastator, which has the highest flesh damage but the lowest penetration. And if you're looking for more penetration plus just an overall well-rounded slug for the 20 gauge, you want to go with the Poliva 6U. This does 135 flesh damage and a slightly better penetration value than the Devastator. Now for your 23x75, there's really only one shell that you want to use, and it is the Shrap 10. The reason why I have two here is because the Zvezda flashbang round, this is very useful for the Jaeger test. It requires you to kill PMCs while they are blinded with the flashbang. Now for your 9x18 rounds, the highest flesh damage round is going to be this SP7. It does 77 flesh damage per round. And for the best penetration, you're going to want to go with the PBM. Now the PBM does 40 flesh damage. Now for your 7.62x25 rounds, you're going to use the TT LRN PC for the highest flesh damage. That does a whopping 66 flesh damage per round. And for the highest pin value, you're going to want to use this PST GZH. That, as far as flesh damage goes, does 50 per round. Okay, so jumping down here real quick, for your 9x19 ammunition, for the highest flesh damage, you're going to want to use the rip round. That does 102 per round. For penetration, you want to use the PBP. However, it is very expensive per round. You're talking like over 1,700 rubles a round. So if you're wanting something that's kind of a good middle ground that doesn't have quite as good penetration, but it's almost just as effective, you want to go with the AP 6.3. This can also be crafted in the hideout. You can craft this in the hideout as well, but it's not really worth it. Now for your 45 rounds, you want to use the RIP ammo for flesh damage. This does 137 flesh damage per round. And for high pin, you want to go with the AP round. The AP round does 70 flesh damage, but it is also really expensive. Now for your 9x21 rounds, you're going to use the PE GZH for flesh damage. That does 80 per round. And for high penetration, you want to use the BT GZH. Now your 5.7 rounds are a little bit different. You're going to use the R37.F rounds for flesh. That does 98 damage per round. And for high penetration, you want to use the SS190, but the SS190 is really good too. It does about 50 damage per round. Now for your 4.6 rounds, you're going to be using the Action SX for flesh, and that does 65 flesh damage. For penetration, the most expensive yet most effective round is going to be your APSX, but like I said, it's very expensive. So to kind of cut costs, to use something that isn't quite as effective but still gets the job done, is the FMJSX. It's slightly cheaper, still kind of pricey, but this goes in your MP7, and in case you don't know this, the MP7 has a really fast fire rate, so honestly it really doesn't matter what you use because you're going to put the dude down regardless. For your 9x39, this is like in your VSSs and your AS Vals. For flesh rounds, you're going to use SP5. That does 68 damage per round. For penetration, the BP round is going to be the move. It also does 60 flesh damage, but if you want something that doesn't quite get as much penetration but has a higher flesh damage value, the SP6 is a good alternative, and it's also cheaper than BP too. Now for your 3.66 rounds, this will go in like your VPOs and your Vepers and all that stuff. The Gexa round, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, TKM round, that is what you want to use for flesh. That does 110 flesh damage. The APM round is the go-to for penetration. This is good up against level 4 armor, maybe level 5, but as far as penetration value, you're looking at a good 42, but also for flesh, it does a whopping 90 damage per round. 5.45, let's talk about it, okay? Typically, a lot of people will use the BT rounds or something like that, but if you're looking for the highest flesh damage, you're gonna wanna use this HP round, okay? It does 74 flesh damage per round, and for the best penetration, you're going to use the PPBS Eagle Neck. This has the highest penetration value, but it does do 37 damage per round. And if you're wanting something that's slightly cheaper but does more flesh damage, the BS round is going to be your move. It has almost the same penetration value as the Eagle Neck, but instead of doing 37 damage, it does 40 damage per round. For 5.56, which would be like your M4s or your MDRs, for high flesh, you're going to use Warmageddon. That does 85 damage per round. And obviously, the most penetrable ammo is going to be the SSA AP, but do not buy this, dude. It's so expensive, okay? No one really runs this. If they're running high pin ammo, it's going to be the M995. However, statistically, while this does get more penetration, if you use the 855A1, which is also significantly cheaper than M995, you're looking at more flesh damage and only slightly less penetration value, okay? So the M995 gets 53 pin value, does 40 flesh damage. 855A1 does 46 flesh damage and 45 penetration value. Statistically, I say that this is the better ammo, but if you're trying to flex, use the M995. For 7.62x39, for your flesh round, HP ammo all the way. 85 flesh damage, no question. Now, for the highest pin value, you're going to want to go with the MAI AP. But again, this is kind of like the SSA AP. It's very expensive, not really worth using. It has a whopping 47 flesh damage and a pin value of 58. I would just recommend going with BP ammo. This is super cheap for the type of ammo it is and the damage it does. It does 58 flesh damage and it has a 47 penetration value. So you're going to be good against pretty much anything. Middle of the road, starting out, I would run the PS ammo. This is most commonly found with Prapper, and just for statistical purposes, this has one less flesh damage than the BP. It does 57, but the pin value is atrocious. It's a whopping 32. Now for your Blackout rounds, these are the only two you can choose from. The BCP does 60 flesh damage and doesn't really have that good of a pin value. It does 28 pin, whereas the AP round, which is the most expensive, does 55 damage, but also has a pretty good penetration value of 44. Now, as far as your 7.62x51, the Ultra Nozzler is going to be the move as far as flesh rounds go. It does 107 damage per round, and the most penetrable bullet is going to be the M993. It has a 70 pin value, but the flesh damage is 67. So if you want a slightly cheaper alternative, it has practically the same pin value as the M993, but it does do 70 damage. You're looking at M61. But a good middle of the road is going to be M62. It's a tracer round. It gets slightly less pin than the M61, but it does do 79 flesh damage. So this is a good like middle ground, and it's not nearly as expensive as M61 or M993. So if you're balling on a budget, this is the move. For 7.62x54R, which is going to go in your Mosins, your SV98s, etc., T46M is going to be the flesh flesh round of choice. It does 82 flesh damage, and obviously most expensive but also most penetrable is going to be BS ammo. This has a pin value of 70 and it does 72 flesh damage per round. The cheaper alternative, which is just as effective as far as penetration goes, you're looking at SMB, has a 62 pin value but does 75 flesh damage. And then even cheaper than that, with slightly more flesh damage but slightly less penetration, you're looking at PS rounds. This does 86 damage per round. This is arguably the best for like flesh and stuff. Now your 12.7 by 55, which is going to go in like your Ash 12s and stuff like that, flesh round is going to be the PS 12A. This does 165 damage per round. And for penetration, we're looking at the PS 12B. That does 46 pin and it has 102 flesh damage. So both of these are pretty good for flesh. So problem is the PS12B is obviously the most expensive. This type of ammo isn't that expensive because you're not seeing a lot of people running around with Ash 12s. And last but not least, I really didn't want to include this because this is the rich man's ammo. We're talking 338 Lapua. Let's start out with the TAC X. That is your flesh round. It does 196 damage per round, dude. Holy, you're talking like two tapping somebody in the leg and they're dead. Now, the most penetrating, but also the most expensive, and I mean the most expensive, dude. First of all, this bullet costs 27,000 rubles for one. So if you buy 30, that's like a lot of money, okay? The AP round, Lapua AP, does 115 flesh damage, but it also has a 79 pin value. A step below that, the FMJ, but that also goes for right around 6,000 rubles a round. You're looking at 122 flesh damage and only 47 pin value. So there's quite a bit of a jump between the AP and the FMJ. These two are your go-to as far as like penetration. But again, rich man's ammo. Well, hopefully this guide helped you. If it did, leave me a comment down below. Tell me if you learned something new. If you did enjoy today's video, make sure to hit the thumbs up. I would appreciate that. If you didn't, leave me a thumbs down. Any and all kind of reactions help in the algorithm. But if you are new here and you want to find your way back for more content, make sure to hit the subscribe button with notifications on. Also, I do stream on Twitch Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern. The link for that is in the description below. But anyways, enough pitter patter chitter chatter. Good luck in your raids, and we'll see you in the next one.